Well, hey everybody, welcome back to another of Vendel's weekly arcade quest tutorials. This is one of the last of my tutorial videos that will feature this Vortiger image, I think, given the fact that we'll be having Sakura/Hitokiri coming out in the coming little weeks and the next season. But, that being said, it is time to move away from the Black Prior season and on to new things. So, up this week we have an interesting quest. A little bit of business. I'm finally done with my school classes, so now I'll be able to get these things out much more regularly, which is going to be great. So I'm really excited about having more time to actually play the game, because I've barely had any time to actually play outside of just doing these arcade quest videos in the last couple weeks. Anyways, this week's weekly quest is the Heirs of Virupaksa, and this is interesting because this is one that's actually a rerun from much earlier when Marching Fire first came out, and it was more difficult when it first released. So if you think it's hard now, which it is hard now, but it was even more so frustrating and difficult in the first run of it, back before arcade mode was slightly nerfed. And they've even reduced some of the buffs that some of the characters get during the course of this quest. So this is the Heirs of Virupaksa, and this is the slightly easier but still fairly difficult quest, so bear with me, buckle up, because this is going to be a wild ride. Alright, so phase 1 is the 3 monks. So you're up against about 3 different monks that all do a couple different frustrating things to make your life more miserable. All of them do fire damage. The fire damage is dangerous because if you're trying to fight them with revenge, it does mean that it can cut through what you're trying to do defense-wise if some of the fire damage bleeds over when your revenge shield runs out. Additionally, some of them have a little bit of extra health. One of them has stamina damage on hit, which is really dangerous, of course. If you let them hit you and you start taking out stamina damage, it's hard to recover, especially from a very quick hit intensive character like the Shaolin. And the first one is the only level 2 bot, whereas the remaining 2 are both level 3 bots in terms of how they parry you and how they handle things. Now, generally speaking, though, this is far easier than it was before. The original version of this quest was the exact same, buffs, but all of the enemies also had health buffs, and you had a damage down debuff. That made this fight take literally forever, and you had absolutely no room for error. I won this, I think, on my 3rd try, starting out for this quest again, whereas the very first time I tried this quest when arcade mode was still new, when the bots were worse, and when everything was terrible, I probably spent an hour on this phase alone. Just phase 1 here with the 3 monks. But you push your way through and you'll make it. Additionally, you can use the ledge off to the right if you want to use cheap shot tactics, as I'll showcase a little bit with my Shinobi later on to get through it. But do be aware, Shaolin are very good at kicking as well, and therefore they can cause problems and make it harder for you to actually pull off the cheap shot style. Alright, so next up, we have the Guards, I think it was called. So this one's a little bit interesting. This is part of the reason that one of the phases that really defines what character choice is good. 2 Nuxias is terrible to deal with because of their light spam and the mix-up that they're going to do when you're trying to guard or parry things if you're not well prepared for dealing with their guard catch maneuvers. Because of that, you want a character with a static guard. If you don't have a character with a static guard and they catch you right, they will literally just be able to light you all the way to death without you being able to react at all. And that's just extremely frustrating, and it's not fun to just get perfectly staggered like that and then have to deal with things. That being said, with a heavy character, this phase is not that hard, because you have at your advantage stamina drain on block and stamina drain on attack. What this means is that when you attack your opponent, they're of course going to be exhausted very, very quickly, and you're at low risk of running out of exhaustion yourself, and guard breaks are going to be extremely valuable because they also benefit from this passive buff, making it very easy to put the enemies out of stamina and then manipulate that for the purpose of taking them out. Now, one of the 2 Nuxias does have a respawning feat, so you need to make sure that you kill the health stealing one, the one further away at the beginning first. Otherwise you're going to have a hard time, and you're probably going to have to fight 2 or 3 of them instead of just 1. Instead of just 2. But the phase is fairly easy. I did want to showcase something a little special with this. You can see here a little fight with my Shinobi, where using guard breaks, even though I was exhausted entirely and she was about to go out of exhaustion and back into like regular gameplay mode, I was able to utilize guard breaks because of those passives repeatedly to slowly turn the tables on her, because you actually do more guard break damage to her than you receive when guard breaking stamina wise this way. And so if you ever get into this moment, if you balance your timing right with guard breaks, you can actually just push your opponent out of their stamina to exhaustion while you get back up to full and utilize that to finish the fight. And this was in fact the round of the fight that I actually won. And again, for this phase, just restating it, having a solid block, so playing not an assassin is going to make it easier, as well as just repeatedly throwing out guard breaks whenever you have the opportunity. It makes it very, very safe if you play that way, especially when you get down to just one enemy. Next up, we have One Family. So this one was terrible. Back before Zhang Jun was nerfed at all, and when level 3 bots were harder, this first fight with the Zhang Jun, because he had stamina draining and hit point up 3 rather than 2 like he has now from attacks, was just the absolute worst. It was one of the hardest fights. Also, you only had Revenge 1, I want to say, back then. Revenge 3 allows you to get revenge even during single one-on-one fights in arcade mode, I've discovered. That was news to me. But interestingly enough, these fights are no longer anywhere near as bad as they are because, one, the level 3 bot for arcade mode was nerfed slightly for this Zhang Jun. He's not anywhere near as terrible as he was the very first time I fought him, where he predicted, parried, and dodged literally everything. If you remember correctly, Zhang Jun's level 3 bots when they first came out were just absolute terrors. It was impossible to get any attacks through their guard for who knows what reason, but it was just not fun. But anyways, you take out all 3 of these fairly evenly. There is a ledge that you can use, and there is that shield buff at the very beginning and attack buff that you see me just pick up right there. The Zhang Jun special is he regenerates on hit, so you want to make sure to stay offensive on him, but avoid getting, of course, parried, so that you can take him out fast before he regains hit points. The Shaolin will knock you down on heavy hits, which can be a hassle and also makes it so you do have to be very wary of that ledge, but honestly it's not too bad, and he's no more trouble than the Shaolins in the first phase of this particular quest. This last, why can I suddenly not, Tiendi, I could not remember the name for a second, is also really fairly simple to deal with. As I've discussed before, I'll say it again, anytime an AI has uninterruptible, they tend to act very, very stupid, allowing you to use your uninterruptible movements and other attacks through, because they'll just tank hits to try to get damage off on you, which means if you ever have the health advantage, it's very easy to turn the tables on her and finish her off. And that is exactly what I recommend doing. Rely on the fact that she's not going to parry you as much, but instead going to try to just use her hyper armor attacks, and you'll be able to take her out fairly simply. That phase is not so bad. It was terrible in the first rendition of this quest, but in this rendition, it's fairly easy to get through. Now on to the final phase, Siblings in Death. So if you were paying attention to the background screen, you'll notice that this quest is going to be frustrating because both of them respawn. And they both have regenerating shields, making it very hard to take them out and balance the hit point damage that you do to them. However, there's a few tricks that the arena gives to you that made this one actually easy, even in the past version. In fact, in the original version of this quest, I thought this phase was the easiest of the 4 phases, just because you could utilize the map to essentially win the fight for you. And that's exactly the strategy I'd recommend. You can try to fight them right out, but it's just not going to be that enjoyable. And the reason that you can do this using the map is AIs, when they get hit by any kind of AoE, will kind of just like wander around for a second and let you get a free hit on them. This allows you to utilize the arrows and the catapults to do heavy damage to them as needed. There's also this massive buff zone that gives you all 3 health, shield, and sword attack boost that regenerates over time as well, that you can use multiple times during the quest to maintain your hit points and overcome your opponents. The one key thing is regardless of whether you fight them outright or you try to run in circles and use the catapults to damage them, and so you can get free hits and staggers, you have to remember to get through their shields, and so focus on one person for a little bit afterwards, but also try to balance out their actual health totals, so when it comes time to actually kill them, you don't have what happened to me here, where one of them comes back to life because I failed to kill the second one fast enough. The closer you can get them both to dying, the easier it'll be. Now that being said, there is one alternative to this, and that is they aren't the absolute, like, always revive. They're the respawn, which means that if you execute them, they will not come back. So for that reason, if you can get off and execute utilizing revenge, you can also prevent that character from coming back. And revenge is definitely another alternative way to go in that quest because you are fighting two. However, without the fight UI, it is harder to defend against their onslaught, and therefore it can be difficulty to actually safely build up your revenge meter, but I'll leave that up to your discretion. I recommend doing a combination of actual fighting and using the catapult personally. So now that this has been done, we're going to show just a quick run through sped up with my Shinobi, just so you can see kind of how that went there. It is difficult, like I said, to do with any assassin character, and I died many times in this, so I'm only going to be showing off the successes, of course, but just know that this took me a very long time to pull off with the Shinobi. Each phase was difficult, it was hard to actually accomplish things, even using the Shinobi's general AI exploits, it was still difficult to take down all the opponents during the course of this quest. And so while it's going on, I'll just touch base on a few of the things I mentioned beforehand as we're talking for reminders for when you go through this quest, because it is very difficult. Alright, so first up, remember, you do want to take up all these Shaolins pretty quick because they will all aggro to you over time, and there is this ledge here on your left, but do remember that Shaolins are very, very good at kicking and maneuvering themselves, and therefore you want to make sure you're being very careful when you're playing near that edge. I fell off quite a few times before successfully pulling this off, and additionally, this last one is the most scary of the three Shaolins because of the stamina damage he does. If he gets you exhausted, you're going to stay exhausted. In phase 2, really the way that I had to beat this was just bum rushing and going for parries, the second Nuxia, the one that can actually permadie. She also has hit point regen, so you really want to get on her fast without letting her steal as much health from you. And then additional things to note is doing very quick attacks that you can get in allows you to preserve your defense a little bit better, makes you a little bit safer against riposts from the second Nuxia. And again, I'll recommend don't use an assassin character in this quest because if you deal with that light spam coming from these two Nuxias, you're just going to have an awful time. It is very hard to properly deal with them, especially a character with a smaller static guard, even a smaller reflex guard timing like the Gladiator or the Shinobi. It's just really rough for them to get through this. This is actually something I've talked about a little bit. I personally actually think that the reflex guard shouldn't even be a thing. Now, I get that that might mean there needs to be some alternative nerfs to assassins, or like a diminishing guard where you can only block so many hits before you have to react in a different way. I'd be fine with that, but I just think that the reflex guard is kind of an outdated balancing mechanic, especially now that there are vanguards and other character classes that are just as good at dodging, if not better, than some assassins. And that it's just kind of a frustrating thing. For phase 3, as you see, I utilize that edge for the Shaolin because the Shaolin's really frustrating, but for the most part, it's the same thing here. You just get through with whatever quick attacks you can get off, utilize the buffs that they give you, and your massive revenge gain to take these 3 out. And that was actually probably the easiest phase for me as the Shinobi. This final phase took me quite a while as the Shinobi. I was surprised how many times they caught me, and then I was just being stupid. But also, because of how slow the Shinobi's heavies are, it's difficult to get like a few good solid hits off after the explosion to actually reduce their hit points before they're recovering and hitting you again. This makes me think that having a character that can do one really strong hit helps a lot during this quest, and particularly in this phase, because it allows you to do that single hit and then run away rather than having to load up a couple to break through their shield and do actual hit point damage to them. But essentially you see me fully utilizing the bomb methodology that I talked about here, where I literally just repeatedly run in circles, keeping pace with them so I keep them grouped together, and slowly whittle them down every time a bomb drops, and heal up as necessary using the buff circle. This is probably the only phase of the quest where having an assassin was an advantage just because of the run speed, but there are, of course, other heroes that have a similar fast run speed. That about sums it up for this quest. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. There's a lot to learn. I'm going to retouch on it again because, like I said, this quest is awful. Phase 1, just be careful. Try to avoid getting hit by the fire damage, especially when your revenge is about to run out if you choose to fight them head on. Phase 2, constantly utilize your guard break even when there's 2 of them because you will drain their stamina and make their offense against you less. Also remember, if you want an easier time, use a character with a static guard. Phase 3. Just make your way through it. This one's pretty easy. Make sure to exploit the uninterruptible stance on the Tiandi. And then phase 4, utilize the bombs. You follow those things and you'll make it through it. It is a difficult quest. I fully understand that, but you can make it through it. You see here now that I obviously haven't played in ages because I'm just now seeing the end of the Campaign 5 results and Season 9 because, well, I just didn't have time for it. But anyways, that sums it up for now. I'm looking forward to all the new stuff that's coming out in the next coming weeks. With that, remember, modifiers modify your playstyle. Have a good week. Vendel out.